Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll get started, and I know people are still sort of drifting in, but maybe if we get underway, that will call everyone else in. Good afternoon, I'm Scott Medbury, President of Brooklyn Botanic Gardens. It's my honor to chair this session and continue the regional theme that we started this morning. I've been asked to make a few housekeeping announcements, and I think I'll just do those now, and we'll get on with the program. For those of you who are going on a tour tomorrow, on Wednesday, you're requested to be here at 8 o'clock for a 8:30 departure. So they want everybody here a little early and get everyone organized. All the delegates need their tickets to collect their lunch from the town hall auditorium, where I believe we've just had lunch, and use that same ticket to get on the bus. And if you have a special diet, they'll be named individually. The buses will be loading from Harrop Street, which is just opposite where we are in this hall, so just right out the door there. One other announcement, this afternoon we have an extended tea break to look at the posters based on the themes of the conference, Success Globally Beyond the Garden Walls. And so for those of you who have posters on these themes, could you please stand near your posters during the break so that we can chat you up, and everyone's encouraged to go and look at the posters if you haven't and talk with those presenters. So with that, then I think we're going to go ahead and start the session. As I say, this afternoon we continue today's regional theme. We have two plenary addresses that highlight both the history as well as the challenges and opportunities botanic gardens in Australasia and the Asian Pacific region face. And both New Zealand and Australian botanic gardens have really been an inspiration to all of us around the world with their leadership in plant conservation and in nature stewardship. And in Brett Summerell and Alan Matchett, we have two individuals, an Aussie and a Kiwi, who are just usually and exceptionally dedicated to their work. Brett is acting executive director of the Royal Botanic Gardens Sydney and Domain Trust. He is also deputy director for science and conservation and holds a number of academic positions and is highly distinguished as a researcher and a writer. As a mycologist and a plant pathologist, Brett has confessed to me that he sometimes sees higher plants as merely useful armature and substrate for presenting his beloved fungi and plant diseases, something which I have assured him we will forgive him for. So without further ado, please welcome Brett Summerell.
So now you know where my preferences lie. We'll try and get over that point. I was asked to talk about the challenges and opportunities for botanic gardens in Australasia and the Asia Pacific region. I won't be so presumptuous to take a sort of neo-colonial view in terms of the problems facing those gardens, particularly in the wider region, but I will have a few comments towards the end of the talk about some of those issues and how I feel that they can be addressed, and we have the opportunity to work with different groups based on a lot of involvement in aid and training programs in the region. So I'll leave that for a little later. This little thing should do this. Whatever, it works. When I started to prepare for this talk, I sort of thought about the paradigm of botanic gardens, and this has been exemplified in my own experience over the last few weeks as I've started acting as executive director of the Sydney Gardens. On one aspect, we're an important tourist and recreation destination. You know, you've got to have something there that really attracts visitors, makes them want to come, and makes them want to come back again. It has to be a place that inspires, but we've also got this conflict that we need to have an active role in education and in knowledge participation, passing on and generation of that sort of information. And I think, as has been exemplified in a whole range of talks over the last day and a half, it's really about plant research and knowledge generation and playing that critical role in plant conservation. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot over the past couple of years, I guess, in terms of how do we do all of these things together and actually do make a substantial contribution to plant conservation. I think Clarence used a photo or a photo that was something similar to this morning, but we are blessed at Sydney to be in a location that is quite extraordinary in terms of physical beauty, but it's also extraordinary in terms of visitation and accessibility of a vast metropolis of people and an amazing number of people that come to visit Sydney. We have this rather mystical number of 8 million visitors coming to the Sydney Gardens every year. Of course, most of them are just passing backwards and forwards, going backwards and forwards to work each day, and a large number are just jogging around the site somewhat mindlessly, but we do get a lot of visitors. It is very close. It backs onto the New South Wales Parliament with all the positives and negatives that brings. It's a place that gets used a lot, whether it's be for these large-scale events that we have in the Domain, or for smaller events, marriages, a whole range of things. And the same thing happens at our other 2 satellite gardens at Mount Tomah and Mount Annan. Really important education roles, both inside, tens of thousands of school kids coming to the site every year and to the other locations to learn about plants, to learn about plant conservation and trying to get some aspect of plants into their lives. And outside the walls, in schools, in community greening programs, fabulous programs that are run by our education team that really do make a difference and connect people with plants at a broad range of levels, not only at that purely academic level, but also in terms of making them understand about what plants are, why plants are important, where their food comes, and the connection between plants and their everyday life is critical. I started to list down the challenges, and it does start to get somewhat depressing if you go too far into it and you start to look at all of the challenges that we face. They're enormous. So I've sort of focused on some of what I see as the big picture challenges that all of the botanic gardens in our region, and I don't think it's particularly unique to our region. I think it's something that probably all of you are facing at different levels or at different scales, wherever you might be. To my way of thinking, the biggest problem that we face in terms of as a challenge is this situation of indifference. There is a perspective in the community and particularly from our political leaders and commercial leaders that it's a green space, it's green wallpaper, and we can do fabulous things using that green wallpaper and don't worry about all these other stuff. And trying to get people to understand that there is a depth and there is a breadth to a botanic garden is, I think, one of the more tricky things that we face, and it's certainly one of the more tricky things that are I'm facing the sharp end of it at the moment. We've done some surveys, particularly of the visitation at the Sydney Gardens, and it's astonishing the number of people. Well, it's probably not astonishing, you probably all recognise it, but it's astonishing to me the number of people that don't recognise that we're a scientific organisation, that we have an active role in plant conservation. We do fabulous things in terms of plant conservation, and we have these fabulous education programs. It is really one of the challenges I think we all face in terms of trying to get our message across. Political interference. I've become an authority on political interference over the last few weeks at all different levels. And it is a challenge that we all face, and it comes at all different levels and all different types of things, whether it's a political interference to try and, we want you to run this event on this site, or we need free parking here, or it's a change in leadership. This political interference comes at all levels and is very difficult to control. The demands on our open spaces are an interesting dilemma. It's a dilemma in that you want to have people come to use your space, to use the gardens, to recreate, to enjoy, but it comes at a cost, and it's the balance between the two aspects of these different aspects of the two different aspects of managing the gardens that really can be quite problematic. Environmental and climatic change, I think a number of people have mentioned during the day, and it's obvious that climate change is one of the greatest threats to plant conservation on the planet facing now, but it's also a threat to the actual management and running of a botanic garden. And I'll highlight in a couple of slides from now, and Clarence alluded to it this morning in terms of the bushfire situation in New South Wales. But we also have things like at the Sydney site, we have to start to worrying about what impact sea level rise is going to have on the bottom part of our garden. And this is probably a dilemma being faced by a whole range of botanic gardens, particularly throughout the Pacific region, in what is the actual impact of our soil becoming more saline because the sea level are so much higher than they were before. It's a whole range of changes. Water conservation, water sustainability, changes in temperature regimes are all going to have an enormous impact on the management of the gardens. And then we have this whole range of issues that are going to impact in terms of plant conservation. The region obviously has an enormous plant diversity. In Australia we have something like 25,000 species of plants that we know about at this point in time. A proportion are threatened and there's a proportion that we don't know about. And I won't go into the fungi and how little we know about that, that's another question. Financial and human resources is an obvious and it's a given, and it's something that we all face in terms of never having enough money to do the things that we know we could do and the know that we want to do. It's an enormous issue. When I started at the gardens, we were something like 80% government funded and 20%, probably less than that, 20% earned revenue. We're now to the situation where we're, I think this week, 53% government funded and 47% self-generated revenue. And there is an expectation that that self-generated revenue will increase and will increase and will increase, and the amount of money that we get from the government will decrease and decrease and decrease. But we're a well-resourced garden. Those gardens that are in the region or in regional centres or in other parts of the Asia-Pacific region that are working on a pittance and having to do the sorts of things that we all want to do, maybe with the resources to employ one or two people. It's an enormous challenge. And the other thing that I think is an enormous challenge is to maintain relevance. It's all very good to be doing a whole range of different things, but unless they're relevant to the community and relevant to the government and they actually make an impact, it's really, you must question why they're being done. Why are you doing these sorts of things if they're not relevant to the community? Just a few examples to highlight some of these things. The picture behind the newspaper clippings, and I'll explain those in a moment, but the picture behind the newspaper clipping is what we call the opera on the harbour, the Handor Opera in the harbour. It's named after the person who funded it. As you can see, an enormously wonderful event for those people who are into opera, and quite an iconic thing that happens on Sydney Harbour. But it doesn't come without its issues. And you can see the newspaper clippings for the former Prime Minister of ours, very critical, and always when I'm acting, I don't know why that is, very critical of the fact that this opera is tying up parts of the gardens. It doesn't allow access for people to parts of the site and interferes with their normal daily routine. And trying to arrange the balance between these two things can be enormously complex and challenging from that perspective. This is Mount Tomah, the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens, forgive me, at Mount Tomah. And this is the scene there last Thursday. All those grey clouds in the background are not clouds, it's smoke. And as we speak, where this garden is under considerable threat from bushfires right around the region there. And we'd appreciate your thoughts tomorrow. Tomorrow looks to be a horrendous day for the gardens, with very high temperatures and very strong northwesterly winds coming in. So it's one of those situations, and I think it's going to become more common for both of our satellite gardens at Annan and at Tomah, that we have to deal with the issues of bushfire, issues of drought. Even in the Sydney site, which is relatively well resourced with water in terms of rainfall and access to water, it's still a considerable problem. Water sustainability, the ability to be able to keep the collections maintained, well watered and surviving in those sorts of conditions. At this stage, I'm just concerned to make sure that staff the four or five staff that are there get out at the appropriate time and don't hang around there too long. But with those, there brings an enormous range of opportunities, I believe. These environmental challenges offer enormous opportunities to demonstrate the relevance of botanic gardens. Climate change, land clearing, threatened species, threatened plant communities. They all offer enormous opportunities for us to demonstrate the importance of what we do, the practicalities of what we do and how we do it, so that it can make a significant difference in terms of plant conservation. We're living in a time of societal urbanisation where urban communities are becoming more and more disassociated and disconnected from plants and from the natural environment. I think most communities that you work with, it's becoming the density of the population is becoming higher and higher. People are having less opportunity to garden, to have some interaction with plants and be able to do things that actually connect them with nature. And I think botanic gardens offer an enormous opportunity. And Clarence mentioned this morning about his observations where people, particularly those that are relatively recent to the country, don't want to go out in the bush, but they do recognise that if they come to botanic gardens, they can have an experience that does provide them with an opportunity to interconnect with nature without what they perceive as the inherent risks. And then, of course, when you have situations like bushfires and things like that, it does create fear in people's minds. Conversely, we're finding that there's an increased desire for these sorts of people to want to participate in plant conservation activities. We're getting more requests to be involved in bush regeneration programs or planting programs, and this photo I've used here is a planting day that we had at the Australian Botanic Garden at Mount Annan. Must be only a week and a bit ago, where one of our corporate sponsors, Transgrid, it's an electricity company, all their staff came in for a day to do a bit of planting of a new garden area around our new research facility, Plant Bank, to do those sorts of things and to get their hands a little bit dirty, learn a little bit about the local species of plants around there, have an interaction with some of our science staff, get a tour of the Plant Bank, of the research facilities and seed bank, and have that opportunity. And the feedback that we get from those sorts of days is enormous in terms of they really feel positive about the interaction, positive about that they've made some sort of contribution to plant conservation, even if it's in that tiny, tiny little way and somewhat in a little artificial way. But hopefully they'll go out of that, away from that experience with a desire to see plants conserved more effectively in their natural habitat. In terms of relevance, I think the area that we can really make the big difference is obviously within plant conservation, and I think it's a theme that's happened right across the presentations I've heard over the last day and a half. But they have to be programs that do actually have a real and positive conservation outcome. And I don't think this necessarily means we have to stop the sorts of things that are traditionally happening in botanic gardens or in herbaria, but it's more about the way in which we communicate them and present them to our political masters, to the public and to the community. It's about making sure that link about what we do, whether it's may seem esoteric or whether it's real applied practical outcomes, do have that connection to the real world outcomes in the end. I don't think we can underestimate the importance of our education programs in highlighting conservation and sustainability, and I think this is a big issue in terms of across the region in Australia, to make sure that all of those children that are coming through school programs have an opportunity to have these sorts of interactions, so it does bring about these sorts of changes. And it's also about practical plant conservation programs that can be applied, whether it be at a local level, at a national level or international. I just wanted to use a few examples from the Sydney Gardens programs just to highlight some of the activities that are happening that are very practical. At the Australian Botanic Garden, we have a huge problem with African olive invasion. So it's a woody perennial weed brought in the early days of the colony as a potential rootstock for European olives. It didn't work, and it's a weed that gets spread easily by birds. And as you can see, the thickets, forests of it really that we have at the Australian Botanic Gardens are quite impressive, but they cover everything. They basically cause all of the other species that are present there not to be able to grow. So with help from the electricity company I talked about before, we've got this program to clear African olive in an endangered plant community, the Cumberland Plain woodland, using rather dramatic, large-scale techniques that really get in there and really make a difference. And it's been really quite successful from that point of view to make a difference. And it's got to the point where it's not just important for the garden at Mount Annan, but it's also important for the local communities, the local councils, the local land management groups. They can come in, they can see these sorts of regeneration and restoration programs happening at a local level. They can learn from all of those experiences, and then they can then go and apply it in their local communities, which are our neighbours and within that region. It's an enormous opportunity to use these larger scale botanic gardens where there is the land as demonstration restoration sites where we can trial some of these techniques. We can take some of the information that we generate in terms of from the seed banks and apply it at a local level so that they can be used and seen to be effective. And obviously what we're aiming to do is then to produce a good grassy understory in the Cumberland Plains woodland, and then to eventually restore that habitat. Nationally, and I think I wanted to work on a few points that have been mentioned in some of the previous talks today and yesterday. A lot of these national level practical plant conservation programs are a result of networks and of partnerships. And I think Stephen yesterday mentioned the importance of partnerships, and a few other people today. It really is a critical thing to have effective, strong partnerships to work together and work effectively. And I think the successes that we've had in terms of within Australia have been particularly with the Australian Seed Bank Partnership, which has been a fantastic thing to be involved with fantastic achievements. And it's certainly helped us in terms of the things that we're able to do, and I think nationally it's also helped. In terms of putting together information on threatening processes, and I'll talk a little about that can be used to inform conservation agencies, and again demonstrates that we're relevant to what is happening within the other parts of government that really may have more political clout than we do. And I think one way in which Australia has really led the world is in terms of aggregating data sets that can be used for a variety of different purposes, and I'll talk a little bit more about things like the Australia's Virtual Herbarium, the Atlas of Living Australia, and the seed bank data sets. Seed banking is obviously a key way in which we can demonstrate relevance, and I think I initially, I suppose, as a director of the science program, was somewhat sceptical about the role that seed banks might play in terms of providing real conservation outcomes. But I'm more and more convinced that it is the correct way to go, and that it is the most effective thing that we can do in terms of the sorts of practical outcomes that we can provide from a scientific perspective to plant conservation. And it's not just about storing the seed, it's about using the seed in research programs, in doing high quality science that actually demonstrates that if you get this seed and you do these things to it and it germinates this way, then you can have an effective restoration program. I think any analysis of restoration programs anywhere has probably shown that in the past we have wasted enormous resources, not only financially and human, but also in terms of germplasm, in ill-informed and ill-conceived restoration programs. And I think the way in which we're working now with seed banks is really making a difference to improve the efficacy of these programs. It's also starting to become obvious, I think, that just working on listed threatened species is one way of looking at things, but it does tend to focus on the past and not necessarily focus on the future. And I think it has to become more about looking at threatened communities and looking and predicting where threatening processes are likely to happen. So whether this is about climate change and looking at to ensure that alpine species are well conserved, or looking at other threatening processes like disease or the like, so that the species that are under impact from those sorts of threatening processes are properly conserved. And of course, being a pathologist, I always like to put up a few pictures of plant diseases just to make me feel happy. So we're working with the Seed Bank Partnership in terms of looking at the impacts of diseases like Phytophthora cinnamomi, a water mould that has a huge impact on the Australian flora. These xanthorrhoeas at Werrikimbe National Park are 3 or 4 metres high in terms of their age, so 300 or 400 years old. They generally grow a metre every 100 years. These diseases get in there, spread down the hill, as you can see, and cause enormous problems in terms of loss of plant diversity, and not only of loss of plant diversity, but also the small animals that depend on these species. And then you get really serious impacts of these sorts of diseases. So this is the impact of Phytophthora on the Wallamite pine at the site where it's located. And in those sorts of instances, it's really only a thing that a botanic garden can respond to, I believe. It's got the right set, at least in our case, we've got the right set of skills in terms of having pathology expertise, the horticultural expertise, the ecological expertise, and the seed banking opportunities to ensure that the species is protected from the impact of this particular disease. So we make sure, we obviously have the horticultural programs and research programs to make sure that the plant's in cultivation and in the seed bank, but we also have pathology expertise to attempt an eradication of the pathogen at the site, so that it is able to be, so the plants are able to live in that particular location. And the good news is that so far it's been much more successful than we thought it could have been, and we certainly are hopeful that we'll be able to eradicate the pathogen from the site. It's quite different from what the West Australians are doing, where eradication of Phytophthora from their sites involves large-scale bulldozers and Roundup, and then just leave the site bare fallow for a while. And this is the one that we're really concerned about in terms of an introduced disease, myrtle rust, in this case on a rhodamnia. It's a very highly susceptible species. Seed banking is obviously really important in that case, and screening, using those seed banking collections to screen for the susceptibility response of the particular species to the pathogen. The good news is that quite a lot of the seed banking screening that we've done so far is showing that within an individual species there's an enormous range of variability within their resistance response. So you'll have, within a single seed batch, you'll have individuals that are highly susceptible going through to almost resistant, and this is a much better situation than we ever thought would be possible. But it highlights how really useful these seed collections can be. We live in a world of technological advances, and I think botanic gardens in our region have an enormous opportunity in those areas. I think the world of bioinformatics and databases I've mentioned, social media and communication has the potential to be an enormously powerful tool for getting our messages across, for better or worse. Education is obviously the key thing, and the world of DNA and DNA technology is changing so rapidly. The whole aspect of genomics, the way in which we can use genomic tools to get data not only about a species now, but more about landscape level evolutionary processes, phylogenetic diversity. I don't think it was that long ago where we considered these processes as enormously expensive. Today, to sequence the full chloroplast genome is you're really only looking at a couple of $100 to do that. So the advances and the drop in cost of those things provides us enormous tools to do a whole range of interesting research. Just a little bit about training capacity building. I think botanic gardens like Sydney have an enormous responsibility, an almost obligation to provide opportunities for people within the region to access to different technologies, to different skill sets, but it has to be done in a way that's sustainable. Obviously within the Asia Pacific region, a lot of these challenges are amplified and much greater than we would have thought. But in terms of doing these sorts of things, it has to be based on an effective relationship that leads to a sustained partnership. I've been involved in too many aid programs, or witnessed too many aid programs where it's a very superficial response. a foreign government goes in, provides a whole range of tools or technology, which are fine while people are there learning about it, but 6 weeks later the electricity's failed, the system's not working, and it's a waste of money and it's a waste of resources. It really has to be built on sustained and long-term partnerships, and I think the ones that I've been involved that I'm most proudest of have been those capacity building projects where we've gone in, we've worked with local researchers and scientists. Some of them have then come and done PhDs and masters, and we worked with them for 3 or 4 years. Then they've turned into collaborators, and now those people are becoming leaders in the region in terms of the scientific. So we're having enormous opportunity to influence the future directions of science in the region and actually make an impact that's long lasting. And just a few examples of in both cases where people have come on and done PhDs and masters with us and then have ended up in various leadership roles within universities or government. As I said, partnerships are essential, and I think I'm not the first person to have said that, and they achieve significant outcomes. I think every major activity in Australia that I've been involved with, and I know there's a few people here that have also been involved with, have been based on effective partnerships. The partnership's not always equitable in terms of everybody doesn't get the same amount of whatever it is, but by having that partnership, by everybody being involved and being committed to that partnership, it has achieved wonderful things for the country in terms of the biological outcomes and the plant conservation outcomes. And you know, there's some fabulous examples out there of these types of partnerships, and I mentioned them before, the Australia's Virtual Herbarium, the Atlas of Living Australia, and the Seed Bank Partnership, all built on these sorts of interactions and partnerships, and all with fantastic outcomes that are long lasting. And I'm just going to finish with a few gratuitous slides of our new research facility because I can, and I will. This is our plant bank, our seed bank, and research facility. They just opened Friday week ago, whenever it was a blur. I still don't remember what day it was. But again, I think it just highlights the fact that we're able to get the funding for this. We were able to convince government it was an important thing because we could demonstrate that we'd been involved with fantastic partnerships. So we'd been involved with the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership. That brought enormous kudos to the program that we were trying to put together. It gave us some runs on the boards, and it made a huge difference in terms of being able to get the $20 million that was required to build the facility. That's just the seed vault with a whole bunch of kids there for the opening with John Seaman, who was the project manager. And the labs are just fabulous. So we encourage anybody who might be heading back through Sydney to come and have a visit. So I think the aim of many of the botanic gardens in the region working with these sorts of challenges, the aim is to build effective ambassadors for plant conservation, to be recognised as a leading authority on plant conservation, and it's all about engaging the community at those levels. Thanks very much.
I think we have time for one question, if there is one from the audience. Otherwise, Brett will be with us for the remainder of the conference, so why don't we move on then? Thank you, sir.